Hello and welcome to week one of the I Bet Network's Fantasy Football NFL Picks Predictions podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jeffrey Camus, the foremost expert in fantasy football. They consider him to be on the Mount Rushmore of it. And my name is Tyler. I don't think I'm anywhere near that.
Well, it's been a long time in fantasy sports for me. I remember playing my first paper leagues back in the 80s, where we were actually handwriting and hand entering picks and doing the stats manually by hand. And then, of course, I had the business Dr. Stats Fantasy Sports for many years in the 90s, where we innovated a lot of different things. Like, I know it's hard to believe, but I do believe we had the very first fantasy sports dashboard, which really was a way for people to get, customized projections and stats. And that didn't exist before. And a lot of it came out of being one of those originators and thinking, wow, this is a lot of crap and takes a lot of time to look through these pages of sheets for free agents when you really wanted to sort for something like maybe at bats in baseball or home runs or RBIs or some category you were looking to dominate.
Yeah, like I said, definitely the Mount Rushmore of fantasy football. Paper logs, that's something I don't think I've even couldn't imagine doing
Right. You
that.
guys wouldn't even bother. It wouldn't have grown as much because people didn't want to do all that work. You had to be a real degenerate in fantasy sports at that time to really want to do all that work.
Now, let's jump right into this. We've got a great game tonight. Thursday night AFC Championship rematch. Baltimore Ravens against the Kansas City Chiefs. So, I mean, the Ravens lost a bunch of big pieces on their offense. You know, they lost Gus Edwards, they lost Dobbins, but they did pick up Derrick Henry back there. And the Chiefs, they've got a couple new options for Mahomes out there. I'm not really too sure how I feel on this game. I do think Kansas City at home is probably going to win. I've seen a lot of the money going on Baltimore, but I think that's wrong.
Look, in terms of the game, we can talk about that later. I think Baltimore just catching Kansas City a little off guard that first week, a little tough when you're getting your rings and you're having the ring ceremony and everything. I think Baltimore is the more focused team after laying a big egg in the playoffs last year against Kansas City at home, and that was pretty embarrassing. I think that was a poor performance, definitely for the offense, with the two turnovers from Jackson. I think this is Kansas City's gotten better. So you look at it and think, okay, fantasy wise, Kansas City, yeah, great players. I think that there was a stumbling block with Rashee Rice off-field incident, but they added the deep speed of Xavier Worthy. Marquise Brown not going to play in this game. Pacheco's still very solid, and Mahomes also good plays. So I mean, I think all your main guys are good plays. When you look at Baltimore, it's really the Derrick Henry edition here, where you look at him and thinking, what's he going to do? He's about a 65-yard a game average rusher. That's what he does. And I think he'll be close to that. I wouldn't think for much better numbers, but Derrick Henry certainly is going to be a force there. But beware that you're going to get a lot of ultra TDs from Lamar Jackson this year. And they also have a lot of dominant guys in the red zone with Mark Andrews. So I think Derrick Henry, I would have good expectations, but I don't think he's a top 10 back. I think he's a good second running back in most leagues. And that's about it. And I think you'll be on the fence with him in some of those weeks because I do think the tires have been worn kind of bald on him. And I think he's a little bit, maybe I wouldn't say over the hill, but I think he's definitely at the end of his career.
Now, here's who we got for starting in their fantasy leagues. You tell me if you think I'm wrong on this. Both Lamar and Patrick Mahomes, they're both going to be starting. If you got them, you're playing them this week. Along with, I actually think Henry is going to be a starter. If you have Henry, I mean, maybe a 2 to 3 guy, but I think he's still going to get some good opportunities to run the ball along with Pacheco. Both of them, I think, are starters. Now, wide receiver, tight ends. I think Rice, Kelsey, both of them, along with Andrews and Flowers. If you have any of those guys, this is one of those star-studded games. All these guys are going to do great.
Right. And I think in a deeper league, you may want to take a look at Xavier Worthy because the Chiefs didn't draft him number one to not use him. And they will definitely want to open up the field with his speed. So if you're in a deeper 3 or 4, wide receiver or skill position where you have like 3 wide receivers and maybe a flex, I think Worthy might be really interesting look, especially with Marquise Brown not playing.
All right, Ravens and Kansas City. Who you got? I got Kansas City winning this one.
I'm taking the Ravens by 5.
While getting your picks in, don't forget to set your iBet Network signups. NFL Week 1 predictions are live, and right now, when you sign up and deposit $5, you'll get $50 matched instantly. Also, find discounted plays every week of the NFL season. Thanks, iBet Networks, for sponsoring this podcast.
All right, so let's jump right into this Friday night game. We've got the Philadelphia Eagles and the Green Bay Packers in Brazil Who's the home team in this game? What are your thoughts on this one?
The home team is Brazil. I don't know. That's one of those weird games. I actually didn't even look and see who they chose to be the home team, but one of these teams does get discounted as a home game, which kind of is it's a disadvantage actually when you look at it, because there's home field advantage is such a big deal. Green Bay is really super interesting this year, just because Jordan Love had those 8 great games. He threw the interception at the end to beat the Niners, but really when you watch those games, Packers could have won those games and could have advanced to the NFC Championship. They are loaded with a lot of young guys that nobody knows yet. But I do think this year on these offensive players, so I mean, Jordan Love for sure, quarterback wise, the 2 quarterbacks in this game are starters, no doubt. And then I think you get Josh Jacobs, definitely somebody that's going to be starting, and the Eagles are definitely going to have their starters and wide receiver and running back. So I would think Saquon Barkley looks to have a really big year with the Eagles, because he's such a good pass catching back as well as a great running back. I think Green Bay had a lot of trouble with Saquon when they played the Giants before. And I think A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, I think Dallas Goedert, like, he's okay. He's kind of, I think he's probably, he's right on the brink of being a second tight end. He's not really a first. He's not like a Kelsey guy, but he's probably in the second tier of tight end. So that's dependent on your thing. Let's look at some guys I think that are really interesting for Green Bay. It to me is Watson. We know that Dobbs was great. Reed was really great. Watson has been like the guy we're waiting for something else to happen. But of the guys that has the most talent on this team in the wide receiver core, if somebody's going to develop, number 1 this year, it's Watson. And that's a guy I can tell you, I was in an 18 round draft this last week. I know you were in that draft too, TK. And Watson was still available like 16 rounds. And it's because he hasn't really done anything. But I will tell you, I used to write an article all the time. It's called The Year of Wide Receivers. It was year 3. In baseball, we used to have this. It was year 27, which was the strongest years when the guys were coming into their own. Year 3 for wide receivers generally is their top year. And this is Watson in year 3. And I think he's gotten those hamstrings right. We haven't heard about him in the preseason. He is the burner. He makes the bigger plays. He still runs 4.3 40, and he can leap. He made some unbelievable catches last year. I think Watson could be the big breakout if you're looking for somebody there. Other than that, I think the wide receivers are kind of
running that 4.3 40.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I think he's one of the most dangerous wide receivers in NFL, just because of his size, speed thing, sort of like a Moss. I'm not going to put Moss on him. Give me a break. I think the Packers have a lot of second and third guys, like for fantasy teams. It's going to make it kind of hard. It's where teams like have the plethora of the running backs, where you get like 2 and 3 guys that could come in and be the running back. That's kind of a hard situation. I think the Packers have many guys who are it's great for the team, because they're going to have a lot of weapons to line up. I mean, you could go 4 deep. I mean, Bo Melton who's like their 5th guy, was making catches in the playoffs last year. So I think, Packers have a lot of guys. I think if there's one guy that's going to develop and I take a chance on in week 1, it's Watson.
All
and
right,
then at the tight end position, really quick, Musgrave and Kraft. Good tight ends, but really in the second and third tier of tight ends right now.
I think it's confusing having both of them out there. I mean, one of them is going to have to shine through and be the number 1 tight end for that team, but we're not really sure who it's going to be yet. Now, starters for this game, I actually love and Hurts, both of them. If you've got Love, I'm starting him over some other guys like Stafford. Now Saquon, I think he's going to be the only starting running back for me on fantasy terms. I don't think Josh Jacobs has proven himself enough. I mean, maybe as a good 3rd, 4th guy, but there's so many good running backs that we can take right now. And then wide receivers, A.J. Brown and Smith, both of them, they're starters. Now, I know that you said that you were interested in Watson, but you got him in the 16th round. Watson and Reed, they're both bench guys for me. I mean, if you could get them late,
I don't care what other guys think the value of him is. I knew that they don't think that he has value. The whole point of your draft is drafting guys where they're undervalued. I mean, look at their guys last year. Kyron Williams wasn't drafted in any leagues. Either was Puka Nacua. And those guys became huge fantasy stars last year. The whole point is drafting low value guys, and guys who are valued or considered low. I mean, everybody knows to put high prices on, Jamar Chase and the top wide receivers.
I think what you're trying to get at is they're very low risk for a very high reward to pick late in the round to have on your team. And just like I said, it's a great guy to have on the bench right now, because I don't know if they're going to have a great season yet, but it'd be someone that if you have around and he starts absolutely having a great year, you can throw him in. Make that replacement.
By the way, I got in that same league. And this is a league of veteran guys who play. I think everybody forgot about Stephon Diggs, and I got him in like the 14th round. I mean, come on. Look, this guy is still a top tier wide receiver. He has been quiet. That's the greatest thing. He's been quiet. A super high scoring game, 33-27 Packers.
All right, let's start off with Sunday morning. We've got first game of the day, Cardinals at Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen taking on Kyler Murray. What are your thoughts?
It's, people don't, I think the guy here, the sleeper here on Arizona is, well, Kyler's great. I love Kyler. Love watching this guy play. I think he's one of the most exciting players in the league. I hope he can stay healthy. I hope he stays on the field. I hope he's not playing too many video games. But this is a really solid team. I did really well with Connor. I like the way Connor is used in this offense. He had some really big games. I mean, he hasn't really been super healthy since he was, blew it out with the Steelers many years ago, like 3-4 years ago. But he had a great second half. If you look at his numbers last year, I put him as a borderline first and second running back. Then I like Kyler Murray. Of course, I think he's a 2-touchdown plus, and the freelance plays really exciting. I think it's a good offense. It's underrated team. They're not deep here, right? And they got a lot of younger guys at wide receivers. So, you're really looking for somebody like Trey McBride probably is the standout on this team. Probably has a good chance to be a top tight end in the league. I mean, he's probably ranked top 5. And he had a monster season last year, playing really a lot in the second half. So I think Marvin Harrison Jr., that's an obvious one. Everybody knows the name. They know his father, a Hall of Famer. It's a really interesting team then. And I think Buffalo is a transitional team. You have Allen probably going to have a better year. You're going to have them way more reliant on Cook than they have been in the past. I think you're going to see a lot of these guys. They're going to develop some guys. I think Kincaid's solid as a tight end. Top 10 tight end for sure. He's a starter in most leagues. Then you have these interesting wide receivers, Keon Coleman, who's developing a young player, and then Khalil Shakur, who are guys you need to look at in depth leagues. And then they have like Valdez Scantling. But I really think the guys in week 1 that you're going to focus on here is obviously Allen, James Cook, and I think Kincaid here for them. And then I think in deeper leagues, maybe you'll take a flyer on Coleman because that Allen's going to throw the ball. I mean, we're talking about a team that's got no – they don't have they're not returning any of their starters from last year. Gabe Davis is also gone. So these guys, I wouldn't go deep here in fantasy. I would go on the, Allen and Cook and then Kincaid.
Well, so here are going to be the starters for this game. I don't know how you feel about Kyler, but I think Kyler's going to be a starter. If you picked him, you probably got him early enough to where you're going to need to play him. Same thing with Allen. Cook and Connor, both of them are going to be starting. Kincaid, Marvin Harrison Jr., and James McBride. All of them are going to be starters.
I really like these. I like this upstart Cardinals team. I think it's a tough loss for them. I think it's 30-27 Buffalo.
Next game, Sunday morning, we've got the Patriots taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. What are your thoughts on this one and Joe Burrow, who looks like Jack Frost?
He looks kind of cool. I think he's a funny guy. He's got a lot of personal style. He lives a quiet life. I like this guy. There's a reason he's ranked number 2, probably number 2 or 3 of all the NFL quarterbacks. It was a bummer not being able to watch him because I really like, the thing that the Bengals haven't done a good job of is protecting him. He's taken a lot of licks, but I'd put him as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And I think they get really good news here. Interesting. There's some interesting players here. Let's just face it. We're not going to focus on any of the Patriot guys. We're talking about super deep leagues. If you're going to take a chance on either Drake May, Ramondre Stevenson, maybe that's about it. Hunter Henry is pretty serviceable, but you got to see some consistent production. So, I mean, that's all the time you'd really want to be spending on the Patriots. Let's face it. They're going to probably be drafting number 1 or number 2 next year, but let's go to the Bengals. Way more interesting story. We have a healthy Joe Burrow. Remember last year he was injured going into camp. I think Zach Moss is pretty interesting, replacing Mixon in here. I think that's a really interesting play. I'd rank him as a second running back, probably in deeper leagues. Jamar Chase has been practicing, which is really good news. T. Higgins, very solid all the time. I think one guy here, Andre Avasius, who's going to be like their number 3. I think I probably mispronounced his name, but he's going to be their slot wide receiver. That's somebody that you guys are going to want to look at. I'm sure he was not picked in many leagues, but this is a guy who's got some moves, really interesting player, and could be really helpful for Joe Burrow around the goal line. Then you have Mike Gesicki, serviceable. Again, probably a second tight end. Probably wouldn't be starting him in many leagues, but I think Jamar Chase looks like he's practicing and looks like he's going to run in this game. I would check late game updates on that, but I think those are the guys that really want to take a look at in this game and avoid all those Patriots.
So, all right, let's run through the starters. Joe Burrow, he's obviously going to be out there. I think Stevenson is a good second or third guy to have. I think I've been doing some research on this. Running back dominant teams in the past, they're the teams that always win. It's the guys where you have 4 to 5 running backs on your team because that's where the most injuries happen. I mean, these guys get recycled through this league so quickly now. They just get pushed out right after they get hurt. So I wouldn't mind having Stevenson as a backup on my team. But Chase and Higgins, those are going to be the 2 wide receivers from this game. I just don't think there's really much to look at out there at the Patriots right now. So it's really just going to be those 3 guys for me. Who you got?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the Patriots maybe score 7 points, and I think this is a walk away 24-7 for the Bengals.
Another Sunday morning game, Vikings at Giants. No Tommy DeVito, unfortunately.
Well, this is so, you had the problem here is, they lost, their draft pick quarterback is out for the year. So now they're going to go with Sam Darnold. He's a veteran guy who can make plays. And I think they still have really interesting offensive players. I mean, Aaron Jones lasted way too long in most drafts that I saw. I love the way Jones was really the catalyst. I mean, Jordan Love got a lot of the credit. As a Packers fan, I was bummed that Jones left, but I get what they were trying to do. They probably figured Jones has been a little bit injury prone, but he really was the catalyst, one of the catalysts besides Jordan Love in their second half resurgence. I mean, he was dominant against the Cowboys. And then you look at so Aaron Jones now there. They also have Ty Chandler as a nice backup running back. I definitely would start Jones this week. I think they're going to rely a lot on using him. I love that McCarthy. I think he's a great head coach. I think he's going to get the most out of Darnold. And he knows Darnold from his days back working with the Niners. So I think that's that's pretty solid. I think McCarthy is going to do a good job with Darnold. And I think he's going to be better than most people expect. That said, he's not a starting quarterback for me. He's a number 2 backup quarterback. I would not probably use him because I think he has a penchant to throw a lot of picks. Aaron Jones, for sure. I think they're going to run him. He's going to get his 20 to 25 touches. They know how to use the running backs. That's right out of that McVay kind of offensive style. And then Jefferson, look, he's back. He's healthy. He's probably with Darnold. Darnold can get him the ball. He's got the big arm. I think we're going to see good things out of the offense, even though it's going to be a little more choppy because I think you're going to have inconsistent play. But I would start these guys. I'd start Jefferson for sure and Hawkinson and Jones. So
the guys that I have starting this week, none of the QBs. I do have Jones starting. If you can get Singletary, I think he's a great backup to have, He may not be a starter, but he's a great guy to just keep around, keep on the bench. I don't know how deep your leagues are that you guys are in. Justin Jefferson, obviously, and I don't think you said Malik Neighbors. He's one of those guys. I think he's going to have a great year as well.
Well, rookie wide receivers with Daniel Jones. I think in a deep wide receiver league, maybe a 3. I don't think he's a top 2 guy yet. In a 12-team league, he might be your last second guy. Like he would rank somewhere in the 25 to 30 range for me as wide receivers. Singletary, certainly, he's going to take over. I thought he was great for Houston last year in the playoffs. He was big. He played really well. I think that was a nice pickup. I mean, I don't think they wanted to lose Saquon, but getting Singletary in there is not a bad pickup. I think they're going to have to rely on running the ball and trying to keep possessions down. The problem is they fall behind. This is going to be a real slobber knocker, but I think I'd see the Vikings in this one probably 27-20. But I'm not a big fan of Daniel Jones. I don't think he showed anything that makes me excited about having him in my fantasy league. And I'm pretty sure he went undrafted in most leagues. He's a bottom 7 starter in the NFL. Vikings Giants. I think 2 teams that are going to try to keep the ball control. I think 2014 Vikings in this one.
While getting your picks in, don't forget to set your iBet Network signups. NFL Week 1 predictions are live, and right now, when you sign up and deposit $5, you'll get $50 matched instantly. Also, find discounted plays every week of the NFL season. Thanks, iBet Networks, for sponsoring this podcast.
Follow up with the trend on Sunday morning. We've got the Titans at the Chicago Bears. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a super exciting game. I think everybody wants to see what's going to happen with, both these teams are kind of interesting in a way. I was always wondering why Tennessee was so bad. They are one of the worst drafting teams. They've had some of the worst drafts in the NFL over the last 10 years. So we'll see. They picked up Pollard from the Cowboys. Not excited about using him. They have Ridley, who's kind of bounced around after a suspension, and Hopkins, who's kind of long in the tooth now. I don't see any of these guys, honestly, in Tennessee as starters. So I would not take any of those. No, the Bears are a whole different story. Bears, of course, you have Caleb. To start the season, I think one thing you're seeing with Caleb, he's probably like a 15 to 20 guy in the NFL right now. I wouldn't put him as a starter yet. The one thing you're seeing a lot of him is that it's too much what he did at USC, which is a lot of off schedule plays, which means he breaks the play up, the original play really quickly, and then goes to and scrambles. And he's great at that because he's an athlete. He's a big guy. He can protect himself, and he's got an awesome arm, and he can make plays like that. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the breakouts. That's why like somebody like Odunze, who's like ranked kind of low, could have a bigger year because he's going to be down the field. And you see DJ Moore, a lot of these guys like Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen's probably like a 4. He's probably under Odunze, I think, because he's going to be running more of the traditional patterns, not going to be doing all the freelance. I think you'll see Odunze get a lot of big plays with Caleb breaking up the play early and making plays. I think their running backs on the Bears are really good. I like Swift, was a great pickup. I think he's going to have a monstrous year, looking at 1,200 yards, maybe, and another 400 or 500 catching. I think he could be a 1,600 yard guy this year. Really great pick. I like DJ Moore, and as a sleeper, I'll take Odunze over that. I think Cole Kmet is great as a second tight end. Not my first starter right off the bat, but I think it's going to be highly pretty good scoring game. Bears their offense looked pretty good in the preseason. They're really deep. It's a really interesting team. It's probably the deepest Chicago Bears team I've seen in like years, maybe 20 years.
Well, here we go for the fantasy predictions. I think Caleb, he's going to be a starter if you have him. I also think Swift is. I'm undecided on Pollard, though. I think he's one of those guys where, like I said, maybe a 3-4 guy. I don't maybe love him as a 2-3, but he could have a great year over there. Now,
well, I mean, we got to see what Will Levis does, because if Will Levis is not able to consistently play there, he's not going to open up the holes for Pollard, and Pollard's going to have the same trouble he had running for the Cowboys that he's going to have that with the Titans. So until you see that Will Levis can get the ball downfield, they're going to be stacking 8 and 9 guys in the box to stop him.
Now, Ridley and Hopkins and DJ Moore, I think all 3 of them are going to be starters. I'm really undecided on Allen and Odunze. I think if you can have them on your bench, you can have them, but I don't know if I'd be starting them this week. Perfect.
I like this game. I think the Bears start out the season with a win here, and I think this is like a 27-17. I don't think it's close, actually.
All right, next morning game we've got here is the Panthers at the Saints.
Yeah, who you got? The Carolina Panthers. I don't think there's any starters here. I would like to see more things out of Bryce Young. I think the team's a mess, and I really don't think there's a lot of guys. You're going to be in a super deep league to be starting somebody like a Deontay Johnson. They might come around, but this was a really bad team. And I kind of felt sorry for Bryce Young. He got pounded last year, and, they gave up a lot to get him. I'm not sure how long his career is going to be. In terms of the Saints, you don't have a lot of premium starters on the Saints team. I mean, Derek Carr, he's no better than a number 2, and it's deep. He's probably in the bottom 10 of quarterbacks now in the NFL. I like Kamara, but he has not been the guy who was, and it's typical of running backs. He had a big workload when he first broke out and was catching a lot of balls and running pretty well. But now you're seeing him fall into like that second tier of running back. So he's not a 1 anymore. He's a 2, and it depends on who your third is if you're going to start him. I think Kamara is a great name guy. He's an exciting player. Olave is pretty interesting, probably the most interesting of the wide receivers here. That's somebody I definitely would start on this team. And then you have that kind of Taysom Hill. The Saints, there was a little fantasy thing. This guy used to be kind of like an interesting guy to play, and he still is. Although I'm not sure he's getting as many offensive plays, but I had him in a game, no kidding, where I played him as my tight end, and he got like 3 touchdowns because they used him as quarterback a bunch of times. So he's still going to be like that sleeper tight end in deep leagues where you play him and you might occasionally get that rushing touchdown. So Taysom Hill's kind of fun to play in that way, but that's about it. That's about it in this game. I wouldn't be reaching here to go to like Rashid Shaheed. There's so many better plays than taking a chance with Derek Carr. I mean, I liked what Derek Carr used to do, but he's not a top tier guy anymore.
Yeah, I think neither of the quarterbacks, unless your league is like a 20-man league, which good luck to you in that. But I actually disagree. I think Kamara is going to be a starter. If you have Kamara, you probably took him earlier in the league, so he's probably.
Well, I mean, I think you would start her. I think you start him. I'm just saying he's not the number 1 anymore. He's probably your 2 or 3.
Okay.
He'd probably. I think he's a good player in like a flex. A flex league is a third flex player for sure. And in those flex leagues, 90% of the time, you'd want to load a running back in that flex spot if you can get it.
I think Hubbard falls to 2 or 3. Now, Johnson, Thielen, and Olave, I think all of them are going to be starting as well.
Panthers at Saints, if you must. I think this is like a 17-13 game. and I would probably lean towards the Saints.
Next morning game we've got is the Steelers and the Falcons in Atlanta. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I mean, I think Cousins hasn't really showed himself in the preseason. He's going to start in this game. He's certainly always been a great quarterback. I don't think he has ever had a ton of movement. I think with him, he's still a strong play. I don't know if your first quarterback, I'd probably go with somebody. I'd rank him in maybe the 15 range. So if you have a better guy, a better starter, I'm not sure I'd start him week 1 just to see how he's going to come back from that Achilles. Bijan Robinson, that's a game breaker for sure. I think Drake London, great, really strong wide receiver, and Kyle Pitts, those are all starters here for me on this team. I think it's a really strong team.
Yeah, I think the starters that we've got for this one, it's going to be neither of the quarterbacks, and like you said, unless your league is super deep. Bijan and Najee, actually, I think you kind of jumped over him a little bit. I think Najee, he's going to be a great 2 or 3 guy. I don't know if I'd necessarily start him as a 1, but he'd be
I
a
like
great
Najee.
secondary back.
You're right. I like Najee and Jalen. They're both good running backs, and I think there might be an argument to start both those guys. They've had big years. I would stay away from Russell Wilson. Who knows if Justin Fields is going to get any time, and then you have Pickens and Freiermuth, both probably starters in deeper leagues.
Yeah, and then I think you hit the nail on the head with London and Pitts, along with Pickens. Those are 3 starters for me at wide receiver and tight end out there. So
for sure. Yeah, really kind of low-scoring game, like a 23-20 game here, and I'm going to give the edge to the Falcons in this one.
All right, next up, we have the Jaguars taking on the Miami Dolphins in Florida. What are you thinking?
Yeah, Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, it seems to be regressing. I don't think he looks as sharp as he even looked 3 years ago, and that's kind of a disappointment. You do have Etienne here, who's a starter in all leagues. I like Christian Kirk here as a starter, and Evan Ingram, definitely a starter here. Miami's much more exciting, probably one of the top 5 offenses in the league. McDaniel's super creative offensive coach. Tua is probably in the second tier of starters for quarterbacks, but he's right around 12 to 15. Achane and Mostert, definitely starters in a lot of leagues. They make a lot of big plays for their offense. Tyreek Hill, of course, a no-brainer, and Jalen Waddle. This is a deep offensive team. And then you have Jonnu Smith, who's kind of an interesting guy. He's been kind of a journeyman a little bit in the league. And probably in a deeper league, he might be your starter as a tight end.
Yeah, I think for QBs, I think Tua is probably going to be a starter if you could get Tua. He kind of falls into that. I take him over a guy like Caleb Williams, but I'd also like to look at Caleb. It's tough for me to decide there. But then Etienne, he's going to be starting. Achane, he's going to be starting along with Mostert. I think Mostert is more of a second or a third running back. I wouldn't say he's necessarily starting, but he's a great guy to have around. Hill, obviously a starter. Waddle, obviously a starter. Also Ingram, he's going to be starting.
Yeah, and we didn't mention him, but Beckham now is on the Dolphins, and I think only in super deep leagues would you take him.
I think from Beckham's play last year with the Ravens, I don't know. I probably wouldn't even take him in a deep league. You could, like we were talking about those Packers guys who you could get in the 18th round. I'd rather take a risk on a young guy like that.
He's a guy that you would call, like, he gets overdrafted for name value. Jaguars Dolphins. I think this Jaguars offense is not going the right direction. I think this is 33-17 Dolphins.
Following that up, we have the Houston Texans taking on the Indianapolis Colts. What are your thoughts here?
Well, I mean, I think you got a high-powered game here potentially. We want to see really what Richardson looks like coming back from the injury last year. Taylor again, after his holdout year last year where he got kind of a slow start, Taylor should be much better, and they have Pittman Jr. at wide receiver for Indy too. But, I think this is a really interesting team. I was in a fantasy league this last week where Stephon Diggs went like 14th round, and I'm thinking, God, you've forgotten about this guy. Let's not forget that even though guys have positions on teams, the reality is if a guy's better than a guy, this is how it works. He's going to play more. So if Diggs outplays Collins and Tank Dell, he's going to get more balls. It's just the way it works. So I think this is a powerful offense. I think most of these guys, the Houston guys, you start all your guys there. That's a strong team. I think Richardson, really good potential here. It just depends on how you're going to feel about the injury. I probably would start Richardson if I spent the draft pick on him, and then I go Taylor for sure. Pittman would be a starter. That's about it for the Colts. I think they're a little more interesting. They have some guys developing in their deeper wide receiver core, Josh Downs and Adonai Mitchell.
Yeah, I think the starters in this one, Richardson and Stroud, if you got either of those guys, you probably got them early. They're going to be starting. Mixon and Jonathan Taylor, I think both of them, they're going to be starters. And Diggs, Collins, Dell, along with Michael Pittman. I think we've got 4 great options to take in this game, and they're probably gone in your league, but if not, make sure you have them.
Should be a really interesting game. Texans offense looks super powerful. I'd say 34 points, Houston 34-20.
Now we find our way to the afternoon, the 1 o'clock game. Raiders at Chargers. What are your thoughts on this? We've got the sign-stealing Harbaugh out there.
I love Harbaugh. I think he's great having him in the NFL. I mean, I only think there's only a couple better coaches, Kyle Shanahan probably, than him. And, he's going to add a lot of life to Herbert's career. And I think it's a very interesting team. They drafted a lot of offensive linemen, defensive linemen, guys like that who can protect the team. That's where the game's won. Herbert, I think, is a starter still. He's going to start. Here's the problem for Herbert this year. He's starting off the season with a little less talent. It's undeveloped. But you have some really great sleepers here with Palmer and McConkey at wide receiver. McConkey's going to start. He was like a really late round draft pick. But, that's happened before in Harbaugh teams. He brings a lot of guys in, and a lot of times it's just opportunity to get the playing time. So McConkey's a great sleeper in a deeper league, and he's definitely somebody, if he's available in your league, go pick him up. Gus Edwards, really strong back, kind of very quiet, but he's going to be carrying the rock for them most of the time. He's a great second running back. Hayden Hurst, probably not quite at that level right now. In terms of, the Raiders, you have Gardner Minshew, who did win the job. I wouldn't be starting him. They have some interesting guys to watch at running back. You have Zamir White and you have Alexander Madison. Madison's been really good when he's been healthy, but he won't be the starter. You're going to see kind of a dual running back role here. Devontae is still a starter. Even with bad quarterback play, he still had pretty good numbers. And I think really most interesting guy here is Brock Bowers. Could be a top 5 tight end in the league as time develops. Minshew's a veteran. He knows that tight end, a guy like Bowers, can really help him out when he needs big plays on third down conversions.
Yeah, I think the starters in this game, I know you said you liked Herbert, but unless your league is very deep, I don't think I have Herbert starting. White, Dobbins, Edwards, I think all of them are great 2 to 3 running backs. I don't necessarily want to have them starting, but if I can have them as a secondary or a third guy, I think they're great. Devontae, he's obviously going to be starting. Now, Ladd McKinney and Myers, I think they're both 3 to 4 guys. I think if you can have them or look at 2 to 3, they're not bad guys to have on the bench to see what they do. I think they both could have a great season out there.
It should be a great game. These guys, when they get together, it's always a tough battle of divisional opponents. I say 27-20, Chargers week 1 win.
Next up, we have the Denver, still paying for Russell Wilson, Broncos taking on the Seattle Seahawks, who got out of that contract early enough. What are your thoughts?
Right. And again, got a great trade, by the way, and reloaded their defense with a lot of great players. It was a good trade for them. Bo Nix is interesting. He looked pretty good in the preseason. I think he's a guy, definitely stash, but I wouldn't be starting him this week. Javonte Williams, starter in most leagues. Courtland Sutton, pretty good player. I mean, he's definitely a starter in most leagues as well. And then you look at Seattle Seahawks. I think, Geno's solid. Geno's a 2 guy. I think the running backs here are really strong. They've done a good job of using the running backs here, Walker and Charbonnet. We're going to see, they have a new head coach there, so we're going to see how they use them. Very deep wide receiver team. Metcalf, still a starter, no doubt. And then you have Njigba and Tyler Lockett. This is a really underrated team. Doesn't get a lot of promotion, doesn't get a lot of talk. And I think mainly it's driven because they don't have what's considered a frontline quarterback. There's a lot of good talent. I mean, Charbonnet and Walker, both really good running backs. And they're 3 deep at wide receiver. Noah Fant is more than serviceable. Probably a second tight end for most guys.
Yeah, I think the breakdown on this one, starters for me, neither of the quarterbacks. Walker, Javonte Williams. I think Javonte is more of a 2 to 3 guy, but I think Walker's going to be starting. Now, DK, he's obviously a starter, but both Sutton and Jackson Smith, I think they fall to a 2 to 3 spot for me.
Broncos, Seahawks. I like the Seahawks in this one. I think the Broncos had a really great preseason, but defenses were, not showing a lot. I mean, they're very vanilla in the preseason. I think Seahawks are a much better team than people think. I think that's a really strong offense.
Next up, we have the Dallas redraft Ezekiel Elliott Cowboys against the LeBron James Cleveland Browns. What are your thoughts here?
Cowboys have been a great offensive team. I mean, definitely Dak and CD are starters here, even though CD's missed the preseason. Guys don't play that much. I think it's not a big deal. At running back, I'm not looking at those guys, Ezekiel or Rico Dowdell. I mean, it's ridiculous what they did here at running back. This is not a good team. They just picked up Dalvin Cook. He might be the most interesting running back on this team. I'd take a look at Dalvin Cook. He had a funny press conference where they said, "Can you still do what you can?" He goes, "I'm here. I can do everything I used to be able to do." He went with the Jets. He didn't get a long look with the Jets. You know, they didn't give him any carries. I wouldn't be surprised Dalvin Cook got some carries here. He's like a guy maybe stock on my bench. Take a look at that. You know, Cleveland Browns have a lot of good offensive players. I mean, Cooper for sure. And Njoku seems to be a guy that people don't know. But he was monstrous with Flacco last year. I didn't get how long he hung in most of the leagues that I saw. I was in 2 different leagues, and I saw Njoku staying on the board way too long. I think he's underrated. But he's a strong player. He's a starter for me. Ford's great. Chubb is still a little bit dinged up, so we'll see what Chubb does as the season goes on. Watson's good, but he would not be a starter for me. He would be definitely a backup on my bench.
Yeah, I think starting in this one for me, Dak. But for some reason, I'll say this: in the few leagues I was in, Dak didn't go until really late. He was not a guy that anybody wanted to invest in early. I think he was more of I can pick him up late. It's not a bad pick to take. But neither of the running backs.
He's top 10 quarterback, though. He's a top 10.
No, he is. I'm not saying he's not, but I'm just saying.
And I didn't mention him, but you know, Brandon Cooks. Sorry to talk over you, but Brandon Cooks is a song. He's still a very good, second wide receiver.
Yeah, I think the main starters though in this one, CD, Jake Ferguson, along with Cooper and Njoku.
Yeah, Cowboys here, 24-17.
Following that, we have the Washington Commanders. I actually called them the Redskins when I was doing this earlier, getting everything ready. I skipped right over that.
I think they're going to change the name again, by the way.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure they're going to. Against the Buccaneers. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, Jaden Daniels been a lot of talk about him, but, really, how much did we see him in the preseason? That's the thing. So can he be a starter this year? Maybe. They have some interesting guys. I mean, I like McLaurin is great. They are going to start Luke McCaffrey, who is McCaffrey's brother. And, at tight end, they're not so strong. I think this team, I like that they have Eckler, but I don't see like a lot of like obvious starters here. I think Brian Robinson starts. Jaden Daniels would not start for me week 1. I'd want to see what's going on. I think McLaurin's a starter. Tampa Bay, I think, Baker, again, he's not my starter. I'd start Rashad White. And Mike Evans for sure. He's the veteran. He's always good. Those are the starters here that I would look at. I think Godwin is a good number 2 wide receiver here. I'd have to give him a look as well.
All right, so starters for this one, I don't think either of the quarterbacks for sure. Rashad White, he's starting. Robinson, he's going to be out there. I think Eckler's a great 2 to 3 guy. I don't know if I'd have him first, but second or third, I mean, he could definitely be great down the road. Then Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Terry McLaurin, I think all of them are going to have great years this year. I think they're definitely going to be starting this week.
I think, the Buccaneers, they had their run last year, but I think Atlanta's going to take over that division. I think, here he's going to see the Commanders squeak one out here, 24-21.
Sunday night, we have the Los Angeles Rams taking on the Detroit Lions in Detroit. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's, strong offensive teams here. 70 points total probably going to be combined in this one. Stafford for sure is a starter. Rams reloaded again with Blake Corum, drafting him behind Kyren Williams, who was super dominant. Led a lot of this team, the Rams. You were watching if you were a smart waiver wire guy last year, you were watching the Rams a lot last year because you were watching Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua, both guys who probably were not drafted in fantasy leagues that were dominant for a lot of teams, including a couple of mine. So I think, they have a lot of starters here. Stafford, Kyren Williams. Corum's a guy you want to stash on your bench because, running back are very injury prone. I'd probably handcuff him if I drafted Kyren Williams. Puka Nacua and Kupp are starters. I'm not sure about the tight ends here for the Rams. Parkinson and Higbee, not my starters. They'd be in deep leagues, maybe second or third guys. And I think you look at Detroit, they're super loaded as well offensively. One of the top 5 teams offensively in the NFL, maybe top 6 or 7. But Goff for sure is going, and Gibbs and Montgomery. I'd like to see Gibbs actually get more carries. They are balancing them out a little bit, and I like the way it works. At wide receiver, they have Amon St. Brown and Williams, really good. Raymond maybe coming up. I'd start for sure Brown, maybe Williams in a deep league. And then Laporta, probably number 1 tight end. I drafted him number 1, and I'm going to probably play him. I kind of did a sneaky draft where I drafted Kelsey and Laporta only because I wanted to have trade value, because I know somebody always needs a tight end. It's scarcity position.
Yeah, I can agree to that. Definitely a position where people don't know what they want to take. But here's going to be the starters for this one. I think Stafford and Goff, both of them. If you're in a deep league, you're taking them. But I like a bunch of the rookies before them. Running backs, Gibbs, Montgomery, and Kyron. I think all three of them are going to be starters. And wide receivers, St. Brown, Laporta, along with Nakua and Cup, all four. I mean, this is another game where we've got four guys that if you have them, you're playing them.
Great offensive battle here. This is a 37-33 game with the Rams winning on a late pass touchdown from Stafford.
And finally, we find ourselves at the Monday night game. Aaron Rodgers and the Jets taking on the 49ers at home. What are your thoughts?
Well, if you're a Packers fan, you know that Rodgers is not at his best games against the Niners. So that's the first omen in this game for me. I hope Rodgers does well, even though he's not a Packer anymore. I'd like him to see him do well. I think Breece Hall's a top running back. He certainly, if he can come back, as strong as he was when in his rookie year, now fully healthy, and put together a good year with Rodgers and Wilson. You have some really top line talent here. Rodgers, Hall, Wilson, Conklin. Maybe Mike Williams, but Williams is a little bit long in the tooth. But I think really strong offensive talent there for Rodgers to work with. However, this is a game where, like, if you're a Jets fan, you're like, oh, do you really want to have Rodgers in the face of that Niners defense week one? It's not the greatest starting matchup for him. So I would probably not be starting Rodgers. I know it's hard to say, but he did last in most fantasy leagues really a long time. Brock Purdy, he's going to be a starter for me. Jets defense is good. This is going to be a tougher, like a slobber knocker, you'd call it, like a 23-17 game, because these defenses are both super strong. They lead with defense, both these teams. And I would say, Purdy's good, but these guys are borderline starters. Like this week for sure in this matchup, Purdy probably would be a guy you look at and you're like, I should start him, but like I'm on the fence. Just depends who you're going to have as your number one or who your other quarterback option is. McCaffrey's a must start. Debo's a must start. And, Ayuk's going to start and Kittle's going to start in almost every league. The thing I don't like about Ayuk is I don't like these guys, these wide receivers holding out all the time for the whole year, because the injury you see every year, every season on a guy who's a holdout is the hamstring. And if it's bad enough, that hamstring can last all year and impact that guy and it'll impact his entire year. You've seen it with Jefferson. I've seen it with a bunch of guys in the past. So just watch for that. But that's who you're starting in this one.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to disagree a little bit. I think the only QB who would be starting for me on this one is going to be Purdy. I think McCaffrey and Breece Hall, both of them, if you got them, you're starting them. Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle, along with Garrett Wilson. Those are going to be the four. Another game with all four. And it's surprising how many we have now. I hope that we have that many later on in the season. But those are going to be the guys for me in this one.
Jets and 49ers, again, a defensive struggle. 27-23 Niners.
While getting your picks in, don't forget to set your iBet Network signups. NFL Week 1 predictions are live, and right now, when you sign up and deposit $5, you'll get $50 matched instantly. Also, find discounted plays every week of the NFL season. Thanks, iBet Networks, for sponsoring this podcast.